You think $63 silver is a price. Inside a solar factory, $63 is a sound. It's the sound of a procurement inbox refreshing at 6:12 a.m. It's the sound of a pay supplier rewriting a quote and shortening the validity window from 30 days to 24 hours. It's the sound of a line manager whispering, "If we slow the printer even 2%, we miss the shipment." It's the sound of a CFO saying, "We are not eating this." And then the room goes quiet because everybody in that room knows something the internet doesn't. Solar isn't built on hope. Solar is built on throughput. And throughput is built on one boring, violent little truth. The metal that touches everything can stop everything. Silver. Not because it's rare like a gemstone, because it's essential like a nerve. And right now, silver is sitting around $63 an ounce after recently printing a record high above 64. That's not hype. That's a market telling you it's in a different regime. And when a regime changes, factories don't debate it, they react to it. So if you came here for a cute chart story, leave now, because this is the story of 2026. The year manufacturers panic, not because demand is weak, but because demand is too strong, while the one input you can't fake starts acting like a choke chain. Welcome to the solar panel crisis 2026. Not no panels exist, something scarier. Panels exist, but the math breaks. And when the math breaks, the supply chain starts locking doors. Let's talk about why. The world sees cheap solar panels and assumes the world solved solar. That's the lie. Yes, module prices crashed. Yes, panels got cheap, but cheap doesn't mean healthy. Cheap can mean bleeding. In the last cycle, manufacturers entered a brutal race to the bottom. Panels sold so cheap that factories survived by running faster, paying suppliers later, and praying the next quarter would be kinder. You don't need to love numbers to understand this. When the product is priced like a commodity, any sudden cost shock is a heart attack. And silver is not a small shock when you're operating on pennies, because solar is not selling a panel. Solar is selling cost per watt. And when module prices are already crushed, the room has no oxygen for surprises. So when silver hits $63, it's not, oh no, costs are up. It's who dies first. That's why the panic is real. And it gets worse, because at the same time manufacturers were fighting that price war, they were also marching toward a technology transition. More efficient cells, more N-type, more TOPCon, more heterojunction. And in that transition window, silver doesn't always go down. Sometimes it goes up per cell before it goes down. That's how transitions work. They're messy. And messy plus $63 is how you get crisis behavior. Now we zoom in, not on a chart, on a solar cell. A solar cell is a layered device. What matters for this story is the part that looks like tiny fingerprints on the surface. Those are metal lines, conductors. They collect electrons and move them out of the cell with minimal loss. That metal is mostly silver, not because silver is fashionable, because silver is highly conductive, process mature, reliable in screen printing, and it plays nice with a manufacturing ecosystem that makes billions of cells a year. In factory language, silver is not a luxury. Silver is a process anchor. So when someone says, just replace silver with copper, they're not wrong, but they're early. Because replace in solar doesn't mean swap. Replace means new materials, new process windows, new yields, new failure modes, new reliability testing, new bankability approvals, and new warranty risk. A solar panel is not a phone. You can't push an update. A solar panel is a 25-year promise made of atoms. And here's what that promise looks like on the production floor. It's not a pretty green energy montage. It's a relentless sequence of steps where one tiny variance can turn into a warranty nightmare. You start with wafers. You run diffusion. You do passivation. You do anti-reflection. You do laser opening. You do printing. And the printing step metallization is where the real tension lives. Because printing silver paste is not just apply ink. It's screen tension. It's squeegee pressure. It's paste viscosity drifting with temperature and humidity. It's finger geometry that looks perfect on a lab sample and turns ugly at full line speed. It's a firing profile that must sinter the contact without burning the surface. It's microscopic cracks you don't see until the module sits in the sun for 6 months and starts losing power. So when the world says, just reduce silver, the factory hears. Change the microscopic skeleton of the cell while the conveyor belt keeps moving. That's why engineers panic first. Because engineers understand the difference between we can do this in a controlled experiment and we can do this at gigawatt scale with variable materials in 4 different climates across 3 different suppliers with customers who will sue if degradation rises. Robles and deserve it. And that brings us to the worst trap of all. The market wants cheaper panels every year, but the physics tax doesn't care what customers want. If you drive silver down too aggressively, you pay the physics tax in higher resistance. If you keep silver, you pay the commodity tax in higher cost. If you switch to copper too fast, you pay the reliability tax in new failure modes. So 2026 isn't just a price year, it's a decision year, a year when manufacturers choose which tax they can survive. And when every option has a tax, that's when panic becomes contagious. Because panic spreads through one thing factories worship: on-time delivery. The moment on-time delivery becomes uncertain, everything downstream starts to wobble. Project developers, utilities, financiers, insurance underwriters, governments counting gigawatts, and investors who thought the transition was a straight line. That's why silver at $63 isn't a number. It's a stress signal flashing through the entire energy build-out. So when silver is expensive, manufacturers try to thrift. They reduce line width. They reduce paste mass. They change bus bar designs. They move from multi-bus bar to zero bus bar concepts. They squeeze every milligram. But thrifting has a cliff. Go past a cliff and you don't get slightly worse. You get resistive loss, hotspots, degradation, and field failures that make insurers nervous. So the question in 2026 is not, can solar use less silver? The question is, how fast can solar use less silver without breaking the promise? Now we bring the roadmap logic into the room, because this isn't imagination. This is technology reality. Different cell concepts have meaningfully different silver intensity, especially during transition windows. And the transition window is the danger zone. Because when an industry shifts to new architectures, the early ramp is never clean. Early ramps waste material. Early ramps scrap more product. Early ramps burn through consumables. Early ramps produce awkward yields that only stabilize after brutal iteration. So even if the long-term future uses less silver per watt, the transition can still spike demand at the worst possible time. That's why a high silver price regime is so dangerous during a tech shift, because the industry doesn't get to pick the timing. Efficiency pressure forces the transition forward. Competition forces it faster. Policy incentives encourage it. And while all that is happening, silver decides to become expensive. That is the collision. So imagine this. You're a manufacturer. Your customers demand higher efficiency modules. Your competitor just launched an N-type product. Your market share depends on upgrading, but your upgrade moves you into a zone where silver intensity per cell can be higher. At the exact moment, silver price enters a new regime. That's why 2026 feels like a trap, because you can't stop the transition, but the transition amplifies the pain. Now the math. This is where the screaming starts. Solar lives and dies by cost per watt. When your selling price is measured in cents, you don't have room for surprise inputs that also move in dollars. So even if silver sounds small on a per panel basis, what matters is the multiplication. Billions of cells, gigawatts of output, thin margins, and customers who assume prices only go down. That's why executives panic at just a couple cents. Because solar is not priced like a luxury device. Solar is priced like rice. And you don't survive a commodity war by absorbing input shocks. You survive by having power. Scale power, supply power, technology power, or you don't survive at all. Now the punchline, in 2026, Every solar manufacturer faces three doors: raise prices, eat costs, change metallization. And here's the sick joke. All three doors lead to pain. Raise prices sounds rational, pass costs through. But in a market trained on cheap panels, raising prices is like showing up to a knife fight with a contract. You lose orders, you lose volume, you lose scale. And in solar, losing scale is losing oxygen. Eat costs, sounds competitive, keep prices low, stay in the game. But if you're already bleeding, eating costs isn't a strategy. It's a countdown. Change metallization sounds like the brave option: thrift silver harder, move toward copper-containing solutions, redesign the contact. But changing metallization in a live gigawatt factory is not like changing a PowerPoint. You are changing the contact that pulls electrons out of silicon. If you get it wrong, you ship failures at scale. So in 2026, manufacturers aren't choosing between good and bad. They're choosing between bad now, bad later, and catastrophic if mishandled. That's why the room feels chaotic. Because chaos is what happens when every option has a blade in it. Now let's go inside a real factory meeting. Not the polished PR version, the real one. Procurement gets the quote. Not just higher, unstable. Validity windows shrink. Suppliers add subject to metal market clauses. Lead times stretch. Allocation language appears. Procurement's first question isn't, can we pay? It's, can we get it consistently through 2026? Because a factory doesn't die from paying more once. A factory dies from missing deliveries and stopping the line. Procurement calls engineering. Engineering gets the message. We need to reduce silver loading. Now, engineering hears. Take risk so finance can breathe. Engineering responds with the only truth they trust. We can reduce, but yield will drop at first. And bankability testing takes time. Then the yield war begins. They tweak printing. They reduce finger width. They adjust paste. They change firing profiles. They run experiments that look like progress until the yield report arrives. Scrap rises. Microcracks show up. Contact resistance shifts. Efficiency dips. And then comes the sentence that causes quiet terror. If we ship this at scale, will it survive 25 years? Then finance enters with a knife. Finance doesn't ask about science. Finance asks about survival. Prices are crushed. Customers won't accept increases. Silver stays high. Credit tightens. CapEx is needed. So what's the plan if $63 becomes the floor into 2026? That's when panic becomes policy. Because once panic becomes policy, companies do three things fast. They lock supply early. They hoard critical consumables. They accelerate substitution even if it hurts short term. And those three actions don't just affect solar. They feed back into the metal market. Because when industrial buyers shift from optimized cost to guaranteed delivery, they behave differently than investors. They remove float. They pull forward purchasing. They sign longer contracts. They build buffers. They don't care about the chart. They care about not shutting down. Now let's kill a popular internet phrase. They'll just replace silver with copper. Eventually, yes. But eventually is not a calendar date you can trust under pressure. Copper substitution is a migration, and migrations are messy. Copper creates new process challenges, new reliability proving cycles, new yield pain, new supplier dependencies. So copper is not the instant escape hatch in 2026. Copper is the long-term destination that requires a painful bridge. And when the bridge is painful, 2026 becomes the year you feel the strain. Because companies try to cross too fast. And when companies cross too fast, they break things. And when solar breaks things, it doesn't break quietly. It breaks at gigawatt scale. Now add the hidden weapon, volatility. Even if silver stayed at $63 forever, the industry could adapt slowly. But silver doesn't sit still. Silver is violent. And violence is what manufacturing hates. Because unpredictability destroys contracts. Developers want stable bids. Manufacturers want predictable inputs. Banks want stable risk. When silver becomes a storm, everyone starts writing clauses, adding buffers, demanding premiums. That's how the industry moves from cost pressure to crisis behavior. Now define crisis properly. Crisis does not mean no solar panels exist. Crisis looks like this: selective shortages of certain high-efficiency modules, longer lead times for certain SKUs, mid-contract renegotiations, regional bottlenecks, consolidation waves, sudden price spikes after long periods of collapse, soft rationing through allocation and priority delivery. In other words, the system doesn't collapse, it tightens. And tightening is enough to cause panic because solar is built on massive throughput and speed. When the world is trying to add capacity fast, any tightening feels like a crisis. Now, map the 3 stress roads again, because this is where 2026 becomes inevitable. Pass costs through, raise module prices. But raising prices in a brutal competitive environment can cost you orders. After years of low prices, buyers believe cheap is permanent, so they resist. Eat the cost, hold prices low, and absorb the pain. That kills weaker manufacturers first. It leads to closures, restructuring, and consolidation. Or substitute and redesign faster. Accelerate silver thrifting and copper-containing solutions. But that creates short-term yield and reliability risk, plus CapEx burden. So the smart road can still hurt. That's why 2026 is the danger year. All 3 roads have blood on them. Now, the most important line in this entire video: solar doesn't get built with optimism. It gets built with materials. And when one material enters a new regime, it ripples through everything. Procurement strategies, factory yields, contract pricing, bankability standards, module availability, and the pace of the energy transition. So when silver sits at $63, you are not watching an investor story. You are watching a manufacturing system negotiating with physics, economics, and survival. Now widen the lens. Solar isn't the only industrial lane. Multiple sectors want silver. Electrification wants silver. Grid build-out wants silver. Electronics wants silver. Data centers and AI hardware want silver. Defense applications want silver. So solar manufacturers are not panicking in a vacuum. They're panicking because they can see the broader tug of war. Multiple industries pulling on the same metal. At the same time, in a market that doesn't expand supply overnight. This is how critical metals behave before rationing shows up. First, price rises. Then, contracts tighten. Then, allocation language appears. Then, substitution accelerates. Then, the industry restructures around the new reality. Solar is now entering that sequence. So here's the 2026 question. Who gets to survive? The winners will be manufacturers who can do 3 things: secure long-term pace supply, not just spot buying; execute thrifting without destroying yields; transition toward copper-containing solutions without breaking reliability. Those are not equal skills. Some companies are world-class at cutting cost, but weak at process innovation. Some are great at R&D, but weak at high-yield scale. Some have scale power. Others get crushed by allocations. So the solar panel crisis is not just about a metal. It's about who can evolve fastest under pressure. Now, how do you track this story like a strategist and not a hype addict? You watch signals. You watch language. You watch behavior. You watch what factories do, not what influencers say. If silver stays elevated, not just spikes, that's the regime clue. If module prices start rising after a long collapse, that's cost pressure breaking through discipline. If copper metallization talk accelerates, that's industry admitting the old silver model is too expensive. If you see consolidation headlines and pause language, that's survival math playing out in real time. And if you see more attention to metallization paste, printing, finger geometry, firing windows, then you're watching the war happening at the microscopic level. Because that's where it really happens. This is why manufacturers are panicking at $63. Not because they hate paying more, because $63 threatens the one thing they cannot lose in 2026. Predictable throughput, and if you want the cleanest way to summarize the whole crisis in one sentence, here it is. Solar can survive low prices. Solar can survive high competition. Solar can even survive a technology transition, but solar cannot survive all three at once, while a critical input metal turns into a moving target. That's why this is an acute debate. It's a countdown. Some manufacturers will adapt. They'll thrift harder, they'll stabilize yields, they'll lock supply. They'll invest in substitution. They'll survive. Others will get squeezed until the only move left is consolidation. And that's why 2026 is shaping up to be the year the world learns a hard lesson. You can't build the future on bargain price hardware forever. Not when one critical input metal enters a new price regime. Not when the whole world is trying to electrify at once. Not when the supply chain starts charging you for certainty. Because in the end, solar panels don't get made with optimism. They get made with materials. And silver just reminded the industry who's really in charge.